Hey, so I'm Alex, and I'll be your teacher, I guess, today for how to subset in R. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen in RStudio right here. So if you've already gotten to this point, I'm assuming that you've gone to superdatascience.com/R course and downloaded the demographics data frame as a CSV. And if you haven't, then you should read that. But once you've gotten to that point, the first thing that we're going to do before we even get started is actually import a library that we're going to use to subset later. So what we're going to do is do install.packages, and our library is called dplyr, and you're going to call that as a string, and we'll just click enter. Now, okay, I already have it before, so I'll cancel. But in this case, once you have it already, all you're simply going to do is call it with a library, and bam. Now you can see in our console that it's here. So I'm just going to clear the console real quick. So the next step is we're going to be using the get working directory and set working directory functions in order to access our CSV that we have downloaded somewhere on our computer. So get working directory is a really nice function because all you have to do is this. And right here in the console, we have my working directory right now, which is in my desktops in a folder called R, which is actually where my thing is located. So I don't really need to switch, but I'll show it anyways. What you would do is just set a variable called working directory equal to this, and then you are going to use set working directory and just call working directory. So just run it, and now once you use get working directory again, for me it's not going to change, but maybe for you it will. You're just going to be, you're going to be where your CSV is located. So I'll get rid of this. The next thing you're going to do is actually import it into R. So exciting. Import into R using read.csv. So got to make sure it's a CSV file, although there's really no reason it shouldn't be. And I'm going to call it demographics.dataframe. And I recommend that you do the same, I guess. So we'll do read.csv, and for me, it's saved as demographics.csv in the desktop R directory. So we're just going to run it, and now we actually can get to see demographics.dataframe. So I already had it up from before. Okay, so now we're in our demographics data frame, which is a list of all the countries in the world with their country codes, their birth rates, internet users, and income group. So that's what we're going to be working with today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to learn how to use brackets in order to subset. And that's basically the most basic form of subsetting, but also incredibly important. You have to do every subset with them. So what we're going to try to do is subset by rows. So I'll name it rows. And then what we'll do is, what you do is you call the data frame, then you click the bracket and it should automatically pop up. And you're going to put a comma in. Now what goes before the comma is whenever you're trying to subset by rows. After the comma, when you're trying to subset by columns. So in this case, I guess the first thing let's try to do is just to subset out rows 1 through 10, just to see if it works. And a really important thing to note here is that indexing in R starts with 1 and not 0, which is what it starts with in basically every other programming language. So it's actually really convenient when you're working with data frames to have it start with 1, but it's something you might have to get used to if you're coming from another language. So we'll do 1 to 10. We'll run it. Oh, sorry, I just named it incorrectly. Okay, we have demographics.dataframe here. And now we can look at rows. And what do you know? We have the 5 columns that we had before, but only 10 rows. So that's great. And we can obviously do the same thing with columns. And let's count. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. Let's say we only want to take the first 3. So you take a comma, and then after the comma, which is what you do with columns, you do 1 to 3. And now we can check calls. And we have all the rows, but only the first three columns. So that's great. And of course, you could just do the same thing together. So we'll call this calls.rows. And I'm sure you guys already guessed that you could do this, but you put what you want to subset by with rows before the comma, and then after the comma, you put the columns. And now we have calls.rows, and look at that. We have the first 3 columns and the first 10 rows. So that's really nice. Another problem you might run into is that you want to subset by starting with a certain column all the way until the end, but you don't know how many columns there are. So here we can choose the function endCall, which will give us how many columns we have. So it takes in an input of a data frame. So here we see in the console that we have 5 columns, which is great. Normally you're gonna have a lot more, so you won't be able to count this. So this function is coming really handy. So here instead, what we're gonna do is, let's say we want to go 2 to the end, and we don't know what the end is. Well, in this case, we know it's 5, but normally we won't. So we'll go 2, and all we do is just paste this in. And now we know that we're gonna go 2 to 5, or all the way to the end. And what do you know? We have columns 2, 3, 4, 5 with the first column, which was country name, that's missing. So you can do the same thing with rows, with just n rows. That should give you the number of rows here. Oh, sorry, it's n row. And we have 195 rows. So that, yeah, that's a really, really convenient function that you're gonna end up using a lot if you're subsetting. The next thing we're gonna wanna do is show that you can subset with columns, or that you can subset rows and columns using subtraction. So subtraction, subsetting. So right here we went 2 all the way to the end. That's just the same thing as getting rid of 1. So what we're gonna do is, I'm just gonna copy this over here. And one really nice part of R is that it's built in that you can use the subtraction to subset by subtraction. So we'll just do -1. And right here, you'll see that everything has stayed the same, where we just have the last 4 columns, which is really, really convenient. Okay, so now another question you might be having is, well, what if I have a lot of columns and I don't know what number of columns there are, and I don't really feel like counting? Well, you could easily subset by the names. So what we'll do here is we'll call this names, just to show, and we'll do demographics.dataframe, bracket as always, comma, and let's say we want country code. Say we want country name and income group, actually. Say we're interested in the income groups of different countries. We'll do combine. And what we easily could do is just do 1, 5, and that'll give us that. But we'd rather do it by name. So we'll do country.name, income.group. Okay, spelling here is really important. So you gotta make sure they spell everything correctly. And now we have those 2 columns, which is really, really convenient if you have a lot of columns and you do not know what numbers they are. And basically, in my practice at least, you'll almost essentially never actually be subsetting by numbers. Yeah, it's just really prefer to use strings instead. And so this is how you do it by columns. But what if you want to do something like that with rows? Well, the problem is that we don't really have names of rows. But say we wanted to subset by a certain criteria within the columns. For instance, say we're interested in internet users or countries with internet users that have a higher percentage than 50, let's say. How would we do that? It's also pretty easy, actually. Okay, we'll call this subsetting by rows. Yeah, I'll change the title of that in a second. And we'll call this row val, and I'll explain why I'm calling that in a second too. But you'll do demographics.dataFrame, and what do we say we wanted again? We wanted internet users that are greater than 50. Great. We're gonna do comma, put this before, and before this, in case you weren't familiar with this, a way to extract a row from a data frame in R is to use the $ operator. So for instance, if you do demographics.dataframe, do the $, bam, you have all the names of every column. You don't even have to type them out. So if we just want all the country names and you run it, and in the console, we've printed all 195 countries on planet Earth. So let's say we wanted, within these countries, we want internet users above 50. Okay, we'll do demographics.dataframe, $, do internet users. We said greater than 50, so greater than sign, number, and look at how easy that is. Row.val. Now you can see here that we have 80 observations instead of 195. Observations are rows and variables are columns. Bam, we have only the countries that are internet users greater than 50. You won't see anything less than 50 here, which is awesome. Okay, so you're gonna want to be doing the same thing with not just numerical values, but with factors also. So in case you don't know what factors are, I'll explain that in a second too. Subsetting with factors. So a great example of what a factor is you can see here in income.group. A factor is an observation that describes, that within the column describes itself. So here you'll see that income group has high income, has low income, upper middle income, and that's what I see so far, but we can check exactly what all of them are. But yeah, basically any one of these will describe a country in here. So that's what a factor is. So using the structure function that takes in the argument of a data frame, we can actually really easily check this. So we see income group here, and it's a factor with 4 levels. 4 levels being, we don't actually know what they are yet, but we can check with the levels function. And what you do here is, you do demographics. I keep misspelling. And you use that $, and then you get to call this. And right down here, we see all these 4 levels that were mentioned here. We have a high income, low income, lower middle income, and upper middle income. So now that we have that, say we want to subset by only high income. So we want to see the whole data frame, except under income group, we're going to see only high income here instead of everything. So an important thing to note here is that you're still subsetting by rows, just like it was before. So we'll get rid of this, and we'll call this row.factor. Demographics data frame, and once again you have to call demographics.data frame here. But now with the $, quickly get to income group, and you do equals. And it's important to do equals and not just equals, because equals checks for equality, whereas equals sets a variable equal to something else. So very important to do equals. If you're coming from another programming language, you'll know that. So then we set it equal to the string, and what do we say we want? We want a high income. I'll just copy that just so we don't have any spelling errors. And oh, almost forgot, there has to be a comma here or else it's going to throw an error. I'll just show you that right now, just in case. This undefined column selected. It has no idea what it's doing. Bam, comma. Now it knows that it's selecting only rows. And yeah, now we have row.factor, which is great. 67 observations, which means we have 67 countries that are grouped as high income in this data frame. Now, another great part about that is that you could super easily do it with multiple things by using and or. So What if we wanted high income and low income? Well, we would just put in or, which is done with this tab here. And okay, so a common error that people make actually, and that I made all the time at first, was that they would just do this or, and then they would say, okay, low income. I don't even know what this error is. Operations are possible only for numeric logical. Basically, that doesn't work. What you're going to want to do is instead, you're going to have to copy everything over, which is a bit of a nuisance, but you'll get used to it. And copy everything over and throw in low income. And now, if we look at row.factor, we see that it is high income and all low income. So let's see how many observations that is. 80 observations. I guess there's not a lot of low income. Or sorry, 97. I guess there's not a lot of low income. But yeah, that's how you do that. And then with and you can be more specific instead. So let's say that we wanted to do factor. I'll just copy this whole thing over. Or I'll just, yeah, no, I'll just do this row, call this row.factor, and do demographics.data frame. Let's say we want high income and using only one and operator. Now it's important. Yeah, that's another important thing to note is that you might see in R that people do this and this instead of just this and this. And it's really important to only use it with one subsetting. Okay, so you do and let's say that we want, what do we want to subset by? We want to subset by internet users greater than 70. Yeah, let's see what happens there. We just copy this whole thing over again. Actually, no, we'll just do it like this. Demographics, data frame, $, internet users greater than, what do we say, 70, and then comma to make sure that we have only rows. Now we have row.factor. Actually, what do we, no, we call this row.factor in. We have 41 observations of 5 variables, which means that now we're down to only 41 rows. So we'll see high income, high income, high income, high income, and nothing here is lower than 70. We have 70.8. It's probably the lowest value we have here. So that's a super, super convenient way to narrow things down by multiple things. And of course, you can chain using and or. So something we could do is, you see here, we want to see high income or low income. And let's say we want to see demographics.data frame greater than 70. What we're going to want to do is put parentheses around the or else it's not going to work. And now for row.factor, we have high or low. Well, actually, in this case, none of the low income groups had above 70, turns out, which kind of makes sense that they wouldn't have over 70% of their population have access to internet. But yeah, that is how you do it. Okay. I'm going to. So sorry about that. I just had to grab a computer charger, and hopefully Zoom lets you edit that out. But let's go back to sharing screen. Okay, so what was the last thing we were doing? We were using the and or operator to be able to subset by multiple things, which is a really nice feature that we're going to be able to have here. And next on the agenda, we will show you how to do this in a much, much simpler way. I don't know how I didn't think of this right away. Okay, so this is getting into a little bit more advanced now that you've graduated from basic subsetting. But in reality, once you figure out how to really use these functions, it's actually a lot easier, in my opinion, at least. So let's say we want to do the same thing. Let's say that we want to take high and low income rows, and actually let's say we want to just take just the high and low income, but we want to also subset by row. That will be how we'll be subsetting by row, and then by column we're going to want to take only country name and country code. Say that. Okay, so we use the subset function. So in case you didn't know, you can always see a base R function by doing question mark and then writing the function and then running it, and it will show you exactly how it works. So in this case, we see that subset. I'll just explain it. Subset takes in 3 arguments. First, the data frame, then rows to subset by, followed by, as you'd expect, columns to subset by. So let's try it out. We'll call this with subset, call the function subset. What's the first thing we're going to do? Pass in demographics.dataframe, followed by, and the rows we want to subset by are demographics. Let's just do just high income just for simplicity, because then I'd have to copy over this whole thing. With your demographics.dataframe is equal to, so now these are the rows we want to subset by. And the columns that we're going to want to subset by, basically you're going to be calling the column names. You actually have to use the argument select equals and then use the C. But the nice part about this is that now you don't actually have to call anything as a string anymore. So instead of calling country name, country code as strings, we can just type them in. So country.name, country code, and we'll run that. And now you see that we didn't have to use any like and or operators. And we'll do we'll call with.subset, and there you go. You have 67 observations, which is everything subsetted out, which we subsetted by high income. So there's 67 high income countries, and the only thing that we see is the names of the countries and the code. So that's how you use the subset function. And I think the subset function is awesome personally, because it really simplifies down. And if someone's reading your code and you're using the subset function, they know that you're subsetting, which is really like just easily readable. Next thing we're going to do is learn how to incorporate the which function. Now, I love the which function because I'll just show you what it does. Yeah, it says here right away, which indices are true. So what the which function does is actually return, take in a data frame, then take in an argument right here, which says, you put something that will be false, and then you do something that will be true. So we'll just show you how this works. This is basically what we've been doing the entire time, but the which function allows you to do some really neat things. So I'll actually just copy over some code from what I have written before, just to make this easier to show. Where do we have which? Yeah, right here we have which, subset which. And I'll just explain it right here. So what I did here was this which allows you to put in, in here I check birth rate is greater than 40. So right here is birth rate is greater than 40. And that shouldn't be a lot of countries. And the which checks inside the whole data frame which indices are true for this. And the really nice thing about which is that here, I'll just prove that basically this would be the same thing, right? As if you didn't use which in here. But I'll show why it's useful. Okay, subset which. Okay, now we have the ones that's birth rates greater than 40. But before you couldn't just throw a minus sign in front of that. But now we can because which basically takes all of this and makes it like its own variable. So now we have 183 observations of 5 variables. So basically the really nice thing about which is that I could throw a minus sign in front of it, which will actually return all the ones that are false. And it allows you to subset by row. It allows you to subset by subtraction by rows with values or with factors, which is super duper nice. And this is how you would use, I'll just call this which function subset rows. And then the which function is also really nice for subsetting columns. Which function subset columns. So what we're going to do here is we're going to subset which calls and demographics.data frame. And basically just as before, you're going to put the comma here. And after the comma is columns. So we'll do which. And now you're going to do, it's basically going to check which names of the columns are equal to, once you pass in the names of the columns, it's going to check which are true. So we have 5 column names here. We have country name, country code, birth rate, internet users, income group. So you pass in the argument names. And then one thing we're going to do real quick, and I'll explain why in a second, is we're just going to call this call names. That's probably not a good, that's actually not that great of a demo call names. I'll call it that. And we're going to select a couple call names. So let's see what we want to do. Let's do country name, birth rate, and income group. We'll do country.name, birth.rate, and income.group. So now we have a variable that I guess I'll just call it just to show you guys. We'll give you back these 3. So what's really nice about using the which function is it allows you to use the %, it's called a pipe operator, and it'll basically check, % will check if any of the, using which, if any of the indices are equal to any of these. So it's basically this, it's basically looping it over, but with this %, you don't have to throw in a loop at all. So we'll do which names and then throw in demographics.data frame just so it knows which data frame it's using. And we'll do %. I'm just actually going to copy it over from here just for simplicity. So now we see which names, demographics.data frame, %. I'll change. This is something I had before, so I'll change it. Demo.call.names. Subset which pipes. Yeah, so now we have this. So this is really, really useful if you have like a data frame with a lot of columns and you know exactly which ones that you're gonna take out, and it's probably still a lot. Say you have a data frame with 30 columns and you need to take out 10 of them. Well, you can just write out all the names of the columns that you want to take out. Then instead of having all of those names dragging out here and here, you just call it as a variable with %. And that's why I love the which. It just condenses code and makes everything shorter. And now finally, we're getting to the section that I would call advanced subsetting. But once again, it's not really like, I call it advanced, but once you learn it, you're not going to want to go back. It's going to be way easier than it was before, actually. And we're going to be using the dplyr thing finally. So a big thing about the dplyr, and I guess I'll just write it out here, is that it really takes advantage of pipe operators. So what it does is that it brought in, it used the percent in percent, but also the percent greater than sign percent, which allows you to chain, subsets. And I'll explain how that works. But first, the ways that you subset with dplyr is you select. I actually just copy over this whole example and then we'll go through it. So what it has the dplyr library has a function called select, which takes 3 arguments. The data frame, actually it takes more than 3 arguments. It takes the data frame and then comma, whichever column name you want, comma, whichever column name you want, comma, you can just keep listing on and on. So that'll subset by that. And if you just run it, you see here that these are the 2 columns that I've used. Filter is the way you subset by rows. So right now that I called it, we subsetted by high income, as I've been doing. And yeah, okay, we subsetted by high income. And now I'm going to show you how we can combine all of this and use percent in percent in to make really nice compact code. So let's say that we want to filter by multiple things within income group. Let's say we want to filter by high income and low income. Well, this dplyr allows you to first, you can extract the data frame to the top, so then it'll know to use these as the first arguments for select and filter. So now we don't have to have filter anymore. Then you'll chain the name of that with percent greater than percent pipe operator. We selected the columns that we want to filter by. We want to filter by country, name, birth rate, income group. Great. Then we get to chain what we want to filter the rows by. So in this case, we want to filter the rows by high and low income. So we use income.group, which is name of our column, percent in percent, like we were using here in which before, and then filter by income. So all of a sudden we have this really crazy complex subset in 3 lines of code, which this is why I think dplyr is an awesome way to subset. And once you start using it, you're never going to want to go back to subsetting normal. So we'll run that, and there we have it. So yeah, basically, these are all the essential ways of using subsets. And the question you might have right now is, when should I use which subsets? Well, if it's a really basic subset, you're just going to want to use the really standard normal way like this, using like a combine and then writing out, like I did in this case. You're basically never also going to subset, in at least my experience, with numbers, because almost always you want to know what you're dealing with, which is a lot easier done with strings than with numbers. But you could end up using this end call, definitely. If you want to, you should definitely use which percent in. I would definitely recommend using which and then the percent in percent operator if you're taking out columns from a data frame with a really long number of columns. And I basically only recommend using which with names. Actually, if you're using the minus sign with which, that's also great. Command Z that. Otherwise, I'll almost always recommend using the dplyr, because you can just keep chaining and chaining and chaining different filters, which is awesome. And in general, it's just really nice to get used to the pipe operators, even outside of subsetting, because it allows you to keep chaining like statements over and over and over again, and keep chaining different functions. So then you can start really condensing your code. So I'll stop the share right here and say my goodbyes and say thank you for listening to this video, and everything's in the documentation that I provided as well. So if you ever need to find anything, you can just Control F that, but it'll be second nature. If you're using R consistently, it'll be second nature very, very soon. So yeah, thank you.